Hi everybody, I'm Bia, and welcome back to Cardiac Radio for Teens. For those of you who might not know, Cardiac Radio for Teens is a place where teens can get together with other teens to learn about Spiritist teachings and topics in a way that makes more sense to us and is more relatable to us as teenagers in today's society. Reading the Spirit's book together every week, piece by piece, page by page, question by question, of course we're not going to perfect all the information that's in the Spirit's book, but we are slowly growing our knowledge and growing our understanding so that when little situations do happen, we might refer back to something that we learned in the Spirit's book, whether it was last week or a year ago. But hopefully from each week we can get a little message or two out of it and apply that to our daily lives. And it's also important to remember that it's okay to be confused or not sure about a part, because even the adults that are teaching us and are telling us all about it, they had to read this book several times to understand, and they're still reading it several more times and learning even more things. So this is just our first read of this book. So it's okay to be confused or have questions or comments or not understand, especially since some of the language is language that we don't use every day. So it's okay to be confused, and if you guys are at all, feel free to contact me at cardiacradioforteens@gmail.com, and I'll get back to you right away. So last week we left off talking about, we were in the chapter of moral perfection. So how do we reach that moral perfection? So we talked about scientific things and kind of like just the facts about Spiritism, but now we're getting into, okay, to get to this perfection that we talk about, what do we have to do? And the main thing is these moral perfections. So, and then we left off last week talking about selfishness. So that's where we'll pick up today with question 915. As selfishness is inherited to the human race, will it not always be an obstacle to reign for absolute goodness on earth? So basically they're saying here, like, all humans have this selfishness in them. So is it always going to be something that we have to overcome? Like, it's always going to be an obstacle? And the Spirits answered, selfishness is your greatest evil, but it belongs to the spiritual incarnated on earth, who are of an inferior nature and not the entirety of the human race. Consequently, those spirits, in purifying themselves through successive lives, shed their selfishness, like all other impurities. Are there none among you who would have rid themselves of selfishness, and who practice charity on earth? There are more than you think, but they are not well known, because virtue does not seek to bask in the spotlight. If one individual like this exists, why should there not be 10? If there are 10, why should there not be 1,000? And so on. So here what they're saying is, no, we can get rid of this obstacle that is selfishness, because it's not the entire human race. The selfishness that's brought to the earth is from each individual spirit. And that's because we have spirits, as we know, that are not as evolved, including ourselves. We all have this selfishness still within us, because Earth is not as evolved as many planets. So we have this selfishness within us, and then in our spirit, and then we come here, and we're trying to learn to get rid of the selfishness, but we still have it, so it's an obstacle for our spirit. But if you've already overcome that, if you come to the earth, you're not going to have that problem. It's not always going to be an obstacle for everyone. It just depends on the individual spirit and where they're coming from and how evolved that spirit is. And the other thing to keep in mind is that maybe there are these people, definitely, but they just don't share. They're not out in the spotlight. They're not sharing, oh, look what I did, because as we know, along with doing charity, along with helping others, along with being humble, we also need to not be in the spotlight and not only doing it for attention, because now we're taking away all the good that we did by, again, being selfish and putting ourselves in the spotlight, saying, oh, look what I did. So so there's a lot of these people who practice selflessness, so the opposite of selfish. So they're doing the opposite, but quietly to themselves and not going out of their way to tell everyone about it. So there could be many and many, many people who are selfless, who are not selfish. So it's not going to be a problem for the whole human race. It's based on the individual spirit and how evolved they are and what they're learning. Question 916. Selfishness increases with a civilization that seems to strengthen and intensify it. How can the cause destroy the effect? So here they're saying that as civilization gets more intense, gets more involved, the selfishness increases. So when you have like a small little village, there's not much selfishness. But then when you start getting that civilization's increasing, then you have big cities and big countries and big states or whatever it is, then the selfishness seems to increase. So how can this happen? The spirits answered, the greater the wickedness, the more hideous it is. Selfishness has to do a vast amount of harm so that you may understand how cruel the need is to eradicate it. When human beings overcome selfishness, they will live like brothers and sisters by mutually helping each other through a sense of solidarity. The strong will then support the weak rather than oppress them, and no one will lack the necessities of life because everyone will obey the law of justice. This reign of good is what the spirits are responsible for preparing. So here what they're saying is that we have to see these horrible things so that we understand how bad it is, so that we can fix it. Because if it wasn't so horrible, if it was all like, that's kind of bad, but not too bad, then no one would do anything about it. But when you see this wickedness or something so terrible, you're thinking, wow, we need to change that, or I need to change myself, or I'm not going to be like that. So when we see something horrible, we want to change it, and we act upon that. So sometimes we need to see this great amount of selfishness or this great amount of wickedness of any form so that we can do something about it, so that it can like affect us and affect other people, so that we get it. Okay, we have to fix something about this because it's not working. But when we do truly get rid of selfishness, then we will all live as brothers and sisters, and the rich are going to help the poor and the weak, and rather than oppress them, and everyone's going to have what they need to live because everyone's going to be helping one another. It doesn't mean we all have to have equal, but everyone will have the right amount. Everyone will be able to sustain the necessities of life. So even though we may see things that are so horrible, we can't be like, oh, this is so bad, how am I going to fix it? Instead, we have to see and say, wow, this is so bad, we need to fix it. I need to do something about this. So, and that's when we can start something. And even if we're just starting by changing ourselves, if we see, in schools especially, if we see bullying or any type of thing, that we need to start changing that in ourselves, and then maybe start doing something else in that matter so we can change it. We can't just sit down and do nothing. So sometimes we see all these horrible things and all these horrible things exist to shake in us so that we can do something about it. Question 917. How can we overcome selfishness? So here it's saying, so we see something horrible that's happening with people that are selfish. Now we want to change ourselves. How do we overcome this selfishness? And the spirits answered, of all human perfections, selfishness is the most difficult to uproot. It is influenced by matter, from which human beings, still too close to their origin, have not yet been able to break loose, as human laws, society, and education all support it. Selfishness will be gradually weakened as your moral life gains dominance over your material life, through the knowledge that Spiritism gives you regarding the reality of your future, stripped of allegories and metaphors. When Spiritism is properly understood and identified with beliefs and habits of humankind, it will transform all your customs, traditions, and social relations. Selfishness is based on the importance you attribute to your own personality. Spiritism makes you look at everything from such an elevated standpoint that all senses of individuality is lost in confronting this immensity. Spiritism battles selfishness by destroying self-importance and revealing its true nature. So, as we saw in the beginning when we were talking about selfishness is the most difficult to get rid of, the most difficult to overcome because it's rooted so deep. Like all the other vices that we have root off of selfishness. So getting rid of it is extremely hard. And at the state that we're at, humans on Earth or spirits on Earth, incarnated on Earth, they're still very attached to material things. And when we get rid of selfishness, we want to stop being attached to material things. So the more we grow, the more we learn from Spiritism, the more disattached we become to material things, the easier it is for us to become selfless, to not be selfish. And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense because say if I'm like all of us, if we have that favorite thing that we have, whether it's maybe your phone is your favorite thing, or you have a book that's your favorite, or even a stuffed animal from when you were little, that's your favorite. You have something that's your favorite thing that you would never want to give it up. And maybe if someone says, oh, can I play with that? Can I use it? You say no, because you only want to keep it to yourself because it's your favorite, right? That's being selfish. You don't want to share it with other people. But once we study Spiritism and we are elevating ourselves past that point of view, then we can see that this is just a material thing. And then I'm going to go to the spirit world, and then I'm going to reincarnate again, and again, and again, and again, and I'm not going to have this material item. I'm only going to have it right now. So then you realize, wow, maybe that isn't so important. So then when someone asks, you're able to share it, and you see, okay, yeah, you can share, I can share it with you because you know the reality. You can see further than just this moment. So once we study Spiritism more, we'll be able to get that, and we can already start to get that understanding. So to think about the big picture instead of, oh, just this is my favorite thing right now. But in one reincarnation, that's a blink of an eye, especially for just 20 or 10 years. So once we are able to get less attached to material things, that's when we'll truly start to be able to be selfless, which is not selfish. And then the spirits continue. Human beings often become selfish by experiencing the selfishness of others, which makes them feel the need to put themselves on the defense. Seeing that others think of themselves and not you causes you to think of yourself rather than others. Charity and fraternity must become the basis of all social institutions, the legal realization between nation and individuals. Only then will individuals think less of their own personal interests because they will realize that others have thought of them. Humankind will then experience the upright influence of example and contact. Amidst the present delusion of selfishness, considerable virtue is needed for human beings to sacrifice their own interests for the sake of others. And those who make such a sacrifice often receive little gratitude for such restraint. Those who possess this virtue are welcomed into the kingdom of heaven with open arms, while those who have thought only of themselves will be cast aside on Judgment Day and left to suffer in loneliness. So here they're just saying more of how it is hard in this earth to practice this selflessness and to practice charity and fraternity because of all the influences around us. Because when someone is mean to you and they don't share their favorite toy with you, now you say, oh fine, I'm not going to share my favorite toy with anyone either. So then now you're doing that same thing because you're surrounded by all these influences of people doing that. So we need to work to go beyond that and say, no, what's important is charity, is helping others, is not focusing on myself and not these material needs. So it is a very difficult thing, and we're not going to just snap our fingers and do it, but it's something that we can keep conscious with us every day, little by little. Think, wow, do I really need to keep this all to myself, or can I share that with someone else? And here at the bottom, when they're talking about the kingdom of heaven and Judgment Day, that's going back to Catholic beliefs of how there's going to be a judgment day where you're either good or you're bad, And depending on what you are, you're going to go into heaven or you're going to be left to suffer in loneliness. Which, of course, we know that the mistakes we're going to make, we're going to suffer. But we know that we will get through that and eventually make it to the kingdom of heaven as well. So that's just kind of like a saying, but it doesn't mean, oh, you're rather going to be good or bad forever. We know we're going to work on it, but if we are being super selfish, we're going to have to repay for that and work on that. And then Allan Kardec puts his own comment in and he says, praiseworthy efforts are being put forth to help advance the progress of humanity, and kind and charitable thoughts are encouraged, stimulated, and honored, now more than in other times in history, and yet selfishness continues to plague society. It is a social disease that affects everyone, of which everyone is more or less the victim, and should be fought like any other epidemic. To this end, we must emulate the methodology of a skilled physician and begin by tracing the disease to its origin. We must seek out in every division of human society, from families to nations, from the hut to the palace, to the obvious and obscure causes and influences that sustain and foster selfishness. Once the cause of the diseases are established, the remedy presents itself spontaneously through the combined efforts of all, and the virtue is destroyed gradually. The cure may take a long time, because the causes are numerous, but it is not impossible. That being said, it can only be successful by getting to the root of the evil, that is, through education. Not the education that aims only to educate people, but the one that also aims to make them moral individuals. So here he's making a very good comparison of selfishness to be like a disease that we have, a plague that all of society has, and somehow everyone's the victim. So even when people are doing it to each other, everyone's affected by being the victim of this selfishness. And so we have to, so because it's such an epidemic, it's a problem for every single person, we have to look into it. We have to see the causes from little things like families to big things like, let's say, the government or celebrities or something, and everything in between, from little towns, villages, to big, large cities. So we have to look through all of these things and study them and learn from these things. So other people's mistakes, they are a learning experience for us. They're not something for us to look at and make fun of or to talk badly about, but it is an opportunity for us to learn without making the same mistakes. So we need to go through, like a disease, we need to go through and see all the sources and see what's happening and get a full understanding so that we can start fixing it, so we can start working on this problem. And right at the end they're saying, and that being said, the best way to start working on fixing this is education, is to start spreading. And not just like math, science, English, social studies, but this education of moral rights that we're learning right now. So we already have that knowledge to spread it to other people. So learning those moral rights that can help us get rid of these diseases such as selfishness. And then Allan Kardec continues, proper education is the key to moral progress. When the art of training the moral nature of human beings is as easily understood as the art of training the intellect, a corrupt nature can be straightened out like a crooked sapling. However, this practice demands a great deal of tact, experience, and profound observation. It is a huge mistake to assume that possessing scientific knowledge alone is enough to enable the teacher to exercise it successfully. If we study, for instance, the lives of children, whether rich or poor, and know all the bad influences that act upon their weaknesses from the moment of their birth, and are taking into account the ignorance and negligence of those who are responsible for the upbringing of these children, and the improper means of employing and moralizing them, it is no wonder to find so much wrong in the world. If the same skill and care is given to the training of the moral nature as to that of the intellectual, human beings would discover that there are ostentine natures, and that also, in a greater number, you might think, those who require only the proper cultivation in order to yield good fruits. So here they're just stressing again the importance of education, because we need to, just like they're saying, just like kids learn about scientific things and facts, they also need to learn about their morals, because if we were educated on our morals, because our parents have that responsibility of educating you on your morals, but as we know, not everyone has a great situation with their parents. Not everyone has a great relationship with their parents, and some parents aren't doing that proper moral teaching. So we need to learn and study these moral qualities and these moral things that we have to ourselves, because it's also an important part of us to learn and to educate ourselves. And also, like they're saying, that just knowing the information. So right now, just let's think, Allan Kardec, just finding out this information and writing it down, that's not enough for me to just completely know it. The teacher also has to, if it's like a teacher in school, the teacher goes to college, they learn all this stuff, and they know the information, but they just can't sit here and be like, oh, here, read this paper and know everything that I know. They need to have other tactics to learn it. So we can teach ourselves. So we could say, oh, okay, there's this information, but just reading it is not enough. I need to, like we do, we break it up and we try to understand it further, or we try and put it into our lives little by little every week. So little things that we have to not just read it, but we also have to try to start living it and doing more than just learning it, quote unquote, but do more with that. Just like a teacher. A teacher's not just going to give a paper to read. They're going to do more things about that. So we also have to work on that. And then he continues, human beings want to be happy, and this natural desire prompts them to work tirelessly to improve their condition on earth and seek out the causes of their ills in order to address them. When they understood thoroughly that selfishness stimulates pride, ambition, greed, envy, hatred, and jealousy, and causes constant distress, that it brings trouble to all social relationships, provokes conflicts, destroys confidence, turns friends into enemies, and forces each individual to remain constantly on the defense against each other, then they will see that this vice is incompatible with both happiness and security. The more they suffer from selfishness, the more intensely they feel the need to fight it, just as they fight diseases, dangerous animals, or every other source of disaster. They are compelled to act out as if out of their best interest. Selfishness is the source of all vices, just as charity is the source of all virtues. Destroying one would develop the other. The other should be the goal for all those who seek to guarantee happiness in the present life and the next. So here they went on about all the things that selfishness, all the things that grow off of selfishness. So as we know, as we learned before, selfishness is the worst vice that we could have, because all the things root from it. So we can say, so pride and greed and envy and hatred and conflict, and it destroys your confidence, it ruins your relationship. So all these things that they're stressing come from selfishness. So that is why it's stressing that we need to work on getting rid of this, because that is causing so many of our problems. If we just try to tackle our selfishness, which of course is not going to be easy, but that would help immensely. And so then again, they summarized it all with, selfishness is the source of all vices. So that's the one that all the other bad things are rooting off of. Just as charity is the source of all virtues. So all the virtues are coming off of charity. So we just have to destroy one, selfishness, and develop the other. So once we destroy that selfishness, or we start destroying that selfishness, and then we start developing more charity. And with that, it'll help guide us to happiness in this present life and in the next. So that's where we'll leave off today, and next week we'll continue talking about the characteristics of a virtuous person. So someone who has all these good virtues, what are their characteristics? So we'll look into that next week. Before we leave our message, I would like to address how today is September 11th, and most of us all know or learned about the events that happened on September 11, 2001 in New York City. So we just want to make sure in such a day like this to keep your hearts open and keep praying for all of these people, whether you know someone personally or you don't. Just keep praying and bringing that good energy to the negative energies that might be happening on this event, or the sadness that might be happening. Keep your hearts open and keep praying for all these people and families and whoever is affected by this. Now we'll read the message for today's date, September 11th. Doing something. In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do is nothing. What if we're wrong? What if we pick the wrong person to love, or the wrong job to devote ourselves to, or the wrong city to live in? We waffle and weave. Maybe we can put out the decision for a while. Maybe things will be clearer tomorrow. Not making a decision is making a decision, and it may well be the worst decision we can make. I'll do my research, talk to people I trust, and think hard. Then I'll make a decision and move forward. If it turns out that I've taken a wrong path, I can always turn around and go the right way. If I don't make a decision, I'll never know the right way to go. If at all you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, anything you want to talk to me at all about, feel free to contact me at kardicradioforteens@gmail.com, and I'll get back to you right away. Also, a reminder that our website from the First International Spiritist Youth Forum is up, spiritusyouth.org, and all of our events that we have, our projects that we made are all up there, things that we came up with, creative interpretation, so please feel free to look at it. I'm Bia, and this has been Kardec Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening. This has been Kardec Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening.